And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rorabeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchen.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good, man. Something's different. People can see my fancy shirt and your beautiful face. How you doing?
Well, you're being generous on one account, but I'm doing well as you're drinking your Coke Zero. We saw Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings this afternoon, so we're going to be reviewing that on the first Untitled movie reviews YouTube
On video, yes.
segment. Yeah, so that's really exciting, and again, this is the first time we're doing something like this, so we apologize in advance if there's any bugs or technical issues, like
I'm sure there will
the
be,
internet
yeah.
dropping out or something like that.
Yeah.
So this is a learning curve for us as much as it is to enjoy, and again, I think what better way to kick things off than with a review of a Marvel Studios release that is very much even more so a Kickstarter into Phase 4 than Black Widow is with Shang-Chi.
Yeah. We're entering our own Phase 4, kind of, because we're entering the 4th year of Untitled Movie Podcasts and Untitled Movie Reviews. So our 100th episode, you guys can check out today. It should be up as you're listening to this. So we're celebrating 100 episodes, and we launched a YouTube page, and we're doing video podcasts and hopefully other video content, putting up all of our reviews on video moving forward. So if you like watching us instead of listening to us, there's something for everyone now. So
but you can still listen to us.
Totally. We're still on all podcast services. Nothing's really changing on that end. The only difference is that we're giving an option for people to watch this on YouTube and hopefully open up to a different audience, that people looking to get, Shang-Chi reactions a little bit early, spoiler free, I will add, like our reviews normally are. If you're new to this show, we try to not spoil anything that's not in a trailer. So this whole review will be spoiler free, and most of our reviews are totally spoiler free. As much as, like if you watched all the marketing material, we're going to spoil that stuff, but we won't go into the plot details of the movie. But yes, Eric and I saw the MCU's return to cinemas exclusively, because Black Widow did play on Disney Plus and in theaters, but Shang-Chi is exclusively in cinemas, coming out next Friday, September the 3rd.
Third, yep.
Eric, take it away. What is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings?
Well, this, as mentioned, this is kind of kickstarting off Phase 4 after Black Widow, which was more of a footnote in Phase 4, sort of ending, the tying the bow of Phase 3 and kind of giving Black Widow a bit of a send-off. Now you're really getting into the introduction of new characters that will probably eventually become Avengers, or at least sort of, the new grouping of what the Avengers will become later on. That's not a spoiler. It's just, obviously what they're kind of setting up with this next phase, and probably even into Phase 5. With Shang-Chi specifically, you have this really interesting mix of, an origin story that is classically told in a way that stretches out through the entire 2 hours and 12 minutes, but is doled out in a way that's part backstory that mixes the present and the past, that's also combining, kung fu and wuxia elements into the actual sort of classic, sort of Americanized action adventure storyline, with a breakout performance from Simu Liu, who's probably best known to Canadian audiences and internationally speaking as one of the supporting actors on Kim's Convenience. He's very charming. He's also, a professional stuntman and knows sort of his way around an action choreographed set piece. So you can tell that, the stunts that he performs in the film are much more seamless. And at the heart of the story, without getting too deep into the plot or spoiling anything, what you have is a classic sort of father-son estrangement, in that the Mandarin, as we come to know him in this movie, is actually Winyu, who is played by the incredible Tony Leung, who a lot of sort of quote-unquote art house fans and academics will know for, his collaborations with Wong Kar-wai with movies like In the Mood for Love and Chungking Express. But he was also the co-lead in Infernal Affairs, which served as the basis for the remake of The Departed, the Martin Scorsese movie. He was also really wonderful in the erotic thriller Lust Caution, directed by Ang Lee. And so having him in this film and playing a complicated antagonist adds this additional layer of credibility to the MCU and to Marvel movies that I don't think they've gotten as of yet. Yes, they've gotten veteran actors to play, key parts and supporting roles, but now they're bringing in these well-regarded international actors.
Stars,
and the idea of thinking like, okay, well, if you can get Tony Leung, who is a combination of like your classic matinee idol, who can just convey so much in one look or one gesture. And again, Wong Kar-wai knows how to use him so beautifully in movies like In the Mood for Love. But then you see him here and kind of playing in a milieu that is more populist. It does add this strange kind of credibility to a genre of films that, again, if the elitists were to look at this, they might actually give it a chance because of him being in it. And it's not just like, Marvel saying, oh, we're thinking of hiring people like Claire Denis to maybe direct a movie, or taking meetings with people like that.
Sure.
Like, they actually acted on it and have somebody that is of, international cinema in this movie. And I know I'm rambling on about, this performance in particular, but he really does.
He's great. He's really good.
I mean, this almost is as much his movie as Shang-Chi. And, when you're watching this, I also think that the story itself takes elements from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but
even the first Iron Man movie, I would say.
And retcons some things, and maybe there's some sort of plot holes there that you can dissect, but does them better than some of those other movies do in terms of their payoffs. I think this is 2/3 of a really solid adventure movie that's also singular in its vision, meaning that it's not just focused on being a part of the MCU and telling, this sort of self-contained story.
Yeah, I think it's enhanced by the MCU stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's forced in there. And I'll echo everything that you're saying. I think I probably, after talking to you after the movie and things like that, I think I like it a little bit more than you. I do think that it also stumbles in that last act. But that being said, like, we'll get to that. But I really do feel like this is the perfect. I know with the Disney Plus shows and Black Widow, that was technically the start of the next, phase of the Marvel universe. But I really do feel like this is the movie that is kicking off this next phase. And you kind of said that, Eric. And I feel like it's almost come perfectly full circle. Like, having this movie be
full ring, right?
Yeah, there you go. Full circle. That works. Because what I'm about to go into is like, we started this all with that first Iron Man movie, and the first organization we see are the 10 Rings. So to come full circle and get a little bit more backstory there, and then even building off some of the elements in Iron Man 3, I think this is just the perfect launch pad into the next phase of the MCU. And I wasn't expecting that. Like, Shang-Chi, I was looking forward to. I was excited that, a fellow Canadian, Simu Liu, was cast as Shang-Chi. We got a ton of Canadian stars going to be in the next phase of Marvel. And like, I wasn't sure what to expect with this. And I think this movie is very different than some of the marketing materials that we've been giving. There's a lot that they haven't shown you. And I think that will, and I shout out to their marketing team, because you'll go in and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Like, even if you think you've seen, a lot of the action sequences, or you kind of know how things are going to play out, like, I think there's a ton in here that you're going to be surprised by. And the action, I know people have been kind of saying this over the last couple of weeks as reactions have started to trickle out, but everyone is right on it. Like, the action sequences in this movie are fantastic. Like, the fight choreography, going from the sequences on the bus in San Francisco over to the side of a fight club building, like
in Macau,
Macau, like this with scaffolding and this kind of parkour fighting, and just Eric mentioned the influences from different Hong Kong cinema and different things like that, martial arts movies, and like, that's all in here, but with that MCU kind of lens on it. And like, I think, like you said, Eric, like, it'll bring people in who are just looking for like a really fun action movie, but then also has enough of that MCU world building that doesn't feel like forced in there, like in Iron Man 2 or certain places like that, that like when they utilize the MCU stuff, whether it's mentioning the snap or other things that I don't want to talk about, like I feel like they really do feel earned and they build on them and they double down on certain things, which I love. And I just think that this is like, I guess since Black Panther probably, which isn't that long ago, it feels weird to be I don't want to be one of those people like the best one since Black Panther or anything like that. But I really do feel like the origin movie got kind of stale, right? And then as we got into phase 3, we're getting more number 2 and number 3 of movies. And, you know, Captain Marvel, I think fumbled a little bit, and then Black Panther just crushed it. And I think this is more on the Black Panther side of just amazing fight sequences, a fantastic villain, also stumbles in the third act. Like I kind of do think Black Panther does a little bit as well. And I think that's
the
just a
CGI
problem.
specifically, like, because it was doing so well with the practical stunt works and composition
in the
sort
first
of
2/3,
with the framing. You have cinematographer, you know, Bill Pope, who also is responsible for shooting Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 and The Matrix. So he knows how to choreograph action and works really well
and move the camera around. And
with Destin Daniel Cretton, who you know, up until now hasn't really done anything in terms of action or adventure movies, has been working with Brie Larson in films like Short Term 12 and The Glass Castle and
Just
Just Mercy. So, you know, his background is more in sort of indie dramas. And Short Term 12, if you haven't seen that, definitely, you know, seek that movie out. It has an amazing cast.
So many people in it that you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's like the best version. It's like a better version of St. Elmo's Fire, where you look back at it and you'd be like, oh, that's where all these people kind of got like their big start. And, you know, from Brie Larson to, you know, Lakeith Stanfield to Rami Malek, it's Caitlin Dever, like all those people are amazing. And it's just a very powerful, emotionally wrought drama about, you know, the foster care institute and sort of like that idea of like, you know, sort of having a second chance and also dealing with the abuse of the past. And I guess that maybe is sort of a connection that sort of bridges into sort of Cretton's filmography, and here that you're looking at the past and present colliding, and obviously can you forgive the sins of the past and also going on your own way. You know, Shang-Chi is somebody who, for all intents and purposes, resents who his father is. And as we learn about his story over the course of the 2 hours and 12 minutes, which I do think is a little bit long, and you might get a little fidgety here and there.
I think it does slow down in that second half. Maybe to your point, but
let me say this though, with the slowing down thing, I still think it is a very Western approach to the filmmaking, because I mentioned, you know, wuxia cinema and kung fu cinema, and those movies are paced in a way that take a lot of time to kind of build to either a big action set piece or sort of a fight scene that plays out almost like dance choreography that's so beautifully composed. Which
I think you get
elegant.
In here.
You do, but those movies do move a lot slower, and you can tell that, you know, even though at times this movie does feel very much like it is taking those Asian influences and honoring them, it still also is understanding that this is, you know, first and foremost an MCU movie made for Western audiences, but it doesn't shy away from paying homage to, you know, those classic styles of filmmaking, and to the point of you have, you know, these characters interacting in a way, you know, that are talking about honor and also, you know, the importance of a name and what that means, and, you know, cultural significance that, again, will probably have more meaning to an Asian American audience, or, you know, internationally speaking, that will probably go above our heads a little bit, because again, you know, we understand we're two white guys on YouTube talking about this and on a podcast talking about it. And, you know, I just appreciate that they are making the attempt to actually interject some of that into the film and sort of try to be universal, but also specific within the context of this story, which I think is really, really wonderful to do. And again, Marvel has gotten comfortable enough now where they're allowing their filmmakers to really sort of experiment a little bit more, but also, you know, have fully realized performances and characters. Because you look at someone like Chris Hemsworth in the first Thor movie, he's a little bit kind of shaky at times. And even though, you know, this wasn't Thor wasn't his first big movie. I mean, he was in the David Twohy film A Perfect Getaway, and was a soap opera actor in Australia, and was on the Dances with the Stars version of Australia at that time. And Liu is not, he's not a newbie either. He's had, Kim's Convenience and episodes of Taken and things like that. But Liu's performance here feels more confident. It feels more driven by charisma and agility and athleticism in a way that Hemsworth became more comfortable over a period of 2 to 3 films, that he kind of finally got into his own in, Thor Ragnarok, and really into Avengers Infinity War, where Liu kind of feels fully formed, maybe with the exception of the comedic back and forth between Awkwafina and him to begin with.
I was going to bring that up. Like, I would say I totally agree with you that I feel like he crushed it right out of the gate, where I'm with you, where Captain Marvel, one of our biggest kind of criticisms is that Brie Larson, like, I love her and I think she does a decent job as Captain Marvel. She still felt like she was, shooting some stuff out of order and jumping into that movie. Like, I felt like she never had a full, like, she had way more potential than what was given in that movie. And I feel like Simu Liu, right off the gate, I was a little, I'm with you. There's a scene at a bar or restaurant with their friends, and a back and forth with Awkwafina's character, which we'll get to probably in 1 second, that I was like, ooh, I don't know if I like this, like, line delivery. I'm like, it feels a little rough. Like, you could tell, like, even the cuts and someone delivering a line, like the stuff that kind of just really stands out to me when I can tell someone is acting. And right away, that's the first thing I noticed. So I'm kind of like, oh no, like, it does start with like an action sequence. So this is probably that, right after he, gets out of bed and does some insane push-ups and stuff like that. He looks great. But the first, like, line delivery with him, and I like the moment at the or at the valet service and kind of things. But when they're talking with their friends, I'm like, oh, there's something rough about this. And then going over to Awkwafina, like, I love her too, but like, I think she's probably one of the weaker parts of the movie, and without being like that third act that we'll talk about, but
she works better in the contemporary settings than she does in the third act of the film,
stuff,
and the mythical elements of the storyline, because she's obviously partly there to be the comedic relief. And what I do like about Katie and her sort of relationship with Shang is that it doesn't feel like this forced romantic relationship. Like, there's
totally
elements
platonic,
of like, but there is elements of like, okay, maybe they will eventually, become a couple down the line. They've known each other since high school, they're best friends. Like, it's not something that's kind of forced, where you have a love interest sort of interjected into a storyline because you need a romantic element in place. Like, this kind of feels genuinely like, they love each other for who they are, and they're very comfortable, and maybe they're not there in terms of their relationship as of yet in terms of romantic aspects, but I really like that it didn't feel forced, or
I
that
love
it
their
felt
friendship
in any way, right? Like, or manipulative in that kind of way of like, okay, we have to have like a love story well.
He needs to save her and there needs to be a kiss kind of thing. Like, there was none of that. And I like their platonic relationship. I like the relationship with her family, because obviously he doesn't have any in San Francisco. And just man, I mean, he crushes it. I love Awkwafina, and I think that there are some great lines from her. I just think what she was given and the way that her character was written doesn't totally work. And I think you don't need her in that last act. And unfortunately, like, or
well, she's almost like use. We talked about Matt Damon in Stillwater kind of sticking out at times, when he's
seeming like a different movie, right?
Yeah, because like that film feels almost like you're watching a European art house film when, he's walking around Marseille in France. And then like the times when he's not in the movie, which are very little, compared to Awkwafina, who is more supporting player, where Damon's a lead in his movie in Stillwater, it's kind of jarring. And you almost feel that way where like Awkwafina, is the comedic relief. She works a little bit better in, the contemporary settings, like even to the point where they give her character like a fanny pack. Like it just kind of feels like she's given the sidekick role, and she is great in other stuff, and she's not bad here either. Like she does have some moments that work, but you look at the performance that she gave in The Farewell and how internalized that was. You're not going to get that performance here.
No.
You're going to get more of kind of the broad comedic spectrum of what she can do. It's similar to Raya and The Last Dragon, where it almost felt like, again, you're having a comedic actor who's kind of popular at the moment, but I think Awkwafina has a great career ahead of her. Like she won't kind of burn out like some comedians do, like being the flavor of the week kind of
and
thing.
You said in The Farewell she gives like a legitimately great performance.
Yeah, but almost like, again, it feels like, if you were to have like Robin Williams or something like in your movie, and then like he's always the guy that you cut to for like a self-aware joke on like, oh, I can't believe this is happening, this is strange. And it's like, we get it, is a very, like each world that we're introduced in a Marvel setting is strange. We don't always need sort of a peanut gallery.
We get it. I think everyone in this world gets it at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they make a joke about half the world disappearing and coming back. But yeah, man, I just going into that last act. So I totally agree with you where that first 2/3 I think is a really great action adventure movie. And I think each set piece, like there hasn't been a Marvel movie in a while where, and even with the Disney Plus stuff, which we've talked about on the main show and reviewed episodes, I'm enjoying What If, but I got a little giddy during each action sequence. Like I haven't for a while, like watched a sequence and went like, holy fuck. Like I remember watching the Black Panther casino sequence for the first time, and the way that the music kicks in and the way that fight scene is choreographed and breaks out over that whole casino as like,
it's Pray For Me, the song, right? But
yes,
with The Weeknd, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I remember watching that with you and feeling giddy afterwards. And I feel like there are multiple moments in this movie. There's a sequence on a bus that I mentioned, and a synthy score comes in, and Eric will say it's the second best bus scene of the year because nobody did it better.
Well, it's different. We had this conversation afterwards, but
both scenes are great.
Both scenes have a different sort of overall aesthetic, similar. But yeah, to reveal, that these characters are also badasses in sort of times of stress and crisis.
Now we just need those characters to team up and we're good.
Well, get Keanu Reeves in there too. Get us like a speed sort of like, thriller on a bus.
I've been having a craving to rewatch Speed. And I know it just came out in 4K, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But anyways, like there are multiple times throughout this movie that I was like surprised.
And Joel P. West also did the score. We should mention that as well, because he has also worked with Cretton on everything that he's done previously.
And I think it's a really interesting, cool score. Like I just mentioned, a big synthy moment, but then it has kind of more, classical, fantastical elements to the score as well. And then your classic MCU kind of sounding stuff as well. Like I feel like it doesn't just have one consistent sound. Like I feel like it changes based on the setting, and the movie changes based on the settings that they're in, right? Like the San Francisco stuff feels much different than, the middle part of the movie to the last act of the movie, that are all in a very distinct kind of location. And like, I mean, again, from the trailers, there was the Fight Club sequence that we thought might have been in Madripoor is not in Madripoor.
It's in Macau.
But it is this kind of interesting Fight Club thing where you get the reveal of like the Abomination versus Wong kind of thing, which we got in the trailer. So that's not spoiling anything, but like, that's just kind of like a fun MCU kind of thing too. That just feels like weird, and like, and why Wong would be there fighting, and like why Abomination just randomly after 10 years just shows up again, and why he's not
as he's referred to though as Emil, which is interesting because you think like Tim Roth is credited, and it's like, what do you think? Like, how much
did you
time...
actually think he did the mocap for it? I guess
I have no idea. I mean, he's supposed to be the main villain in the She-Hulk series, so I'm also now curious to see how that will work, kind of introducing him that. But that kind of felt to me like the most shoehorn thing.
I agree.
Sort of this storyline where it's like, okay, well, we have to have certain connective tissue throughout the film.
I will say both
Benedict
of those
Wong
threads
is great, but it doesn't feel like it's necessary overall to have that scene. Like you could just have Easter eggs of seeing other characters, which you do, fighting in this sort of Fight Club arena and sort of like the smaller venues, and I think that's enough, but I understand as well that you need to also remind, MCU fans that yes, this is a part of it, because a lot of this is its own storyline. And I think the strongest aspect of this is the idea of it's partly a redemption story, but it's also, looking at somebody that's very close to you and being driven by personal motivations, whether it is to escape from somebody that you are familiar with, or to embrace who you are and accept the good and the bad with that, and also the grief and loss of losing somebody and how messy that is. And I think that this is a better movie to deal with family than Black Widow and the Fast and the Furious movies.
Yeah.
And it feels like this is truly the first Marvel film that has that aspect of the theme of family and estrangement. We haven't even gotten into the sister, who's played by Meng'er Zhang, and this is her first film. Like, this is like the first thing that she's credited
I googled
for.
her, and you can find her acting reel on Vimeo. It's one of the first things that pops up from 2019, and I'm like, I clicked on it and started watching it, and I'm like, oh my god, like, yeah, this is from 2 years ago, and she's in acting school in the thing. Like, it's her acting reel from acting school. She's great in this, I think.
Yeah,
too.
as Zaleen, and it almost reminded me, you spoke of Black Panther, like it reminded me of like when you see Winston Duke for the first time in Black Panther, and you're like, who is this guy? And you're like, you don't know who, and thinking of like 9 Days, and speaking of Benedict Wong, who's also in 9 Days as well, you get to see these wonderful opportunities and facets to an actor who looks like your classic 80s action star. And then that movie gave him the opportunity to make this small little indie film about souls wanting to be born and sent to Earth. So I hope to see more of her, because she again is, for a first film, she steals scenes from the rest of the cast. And again, I mean, I've already said how much I love Tony Leung.
You went into it, but I will echo everything. Like, he fucking rules in this movie. He's
like,
so
his
good.
speech about sort of what a name means and sort of what Winwoo represents overall is like, you watch him and you're eating out of the palm of his hand. He captivates you in every moment of this movie, and you almost kind of wish it was from the perspective of him, because you don't want him to leave. You don't want him to, as much as I like Simu Liu, I felt like, and again, watching a lot of the Wong Kar-wai movies over this year, and that's another thing, like, if people love Leung's performance here, please go to Criterion and maybe it's a little bit expensive, but if you're interested, purchase the Wong Kar-wai box set. It's worth the investment to see the collaborations between him and the director. And again, he's one of those guys that's just like, anything he's in, he always adds this level of mystique, but also authority and respect, and he can be menacing. And I think, like, you're looking at a character that starts as a warlord, and in the modern world that he continues on in and creates his empire, he also shows that he can be a man and a human and find happiness and humanity, even if it's brief. And his personal motivations don't necessarily make him a typical villain. And we were talking a little bit about this, after the screening, that I think Marvel has gotten a lot better with their antagonists and making them more complicated.
And they live and die on these things too, right? And the better the villain, the better the movie usually is too. Like, I'm not saying, like, there are some good Marvel movies that don't have great villains. Like, I don't think, like, I love Ragnarok, but I don't think Hela is a great villain. But
even though she's a great looking villain, just the look of that character is awesome. But you look at Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther, you look at Michael Keaton in Spider-Man Homecoming.
I was going to name the same ones.
Even Thanos, who is like B. Jordan and Keaton, their motivations or objectives
are personal and
smaller, where Thanos is still, I want to change the world in my image.
It's a little bit more grandiose, which kind of, but I mean,
but there's still a personal motivation to him, and especially Infinity War, where when Marvel was starting to, in the first 3 phases, one of their biggest criticisms, along with what you mentioned with, the third act being a CGI laden battle. They've gotten much, even with Loki, the way that they've shaded Loki in the series, I think that they've given Tom Hiddleston more layers to work with and defining him as an anti-hero. And then, going into that third act again, I'm disappointed a little bit as well because of this film coming out after the Suicide Squad, and thinking how well done a third act like that can be sort of cultivated and executed with.
I feel you on that. Yeah.
The monster movie genre. And you also, again, feel very sympathetic for Starro in that moment.
Yeah, the third act, it ultimately didn't hurt my enjoyment for the movie, and I like how I mentioned how surprising the movie was, and I feel like you get some of that fantastical element in the trailer, and they give you some of that, but I don't think you're prepared, most people, for how fantastical that last act is. And it does end on this kind of CG, monster fight, which is something that we've seen time and time again in tons and tons of superhero movies. Eric just mentioned that Suicide Squad does it very, very well, but a lot of Marvel movies and just superhero movies in general, kind of like, they feel like they don't know how to end, or they need this big spectacle because they need to spend $200 million and they need to excite audiences. So they need to give you this kind of big thing. But there are a couple moments in that last act where it's just a lot of CG action going on. It is like, at moments you sit back and you're like, the fuck is going on in this movie? In not a bad way, but then like,
it's not incoherent where you can't tell what's going on. It's just, it's very much, it's mind numbing because of how much CGI there is.
And I will say the theater we saw it in is not the greatest. It was dim, and there's a dead pixel, and like, I don't think that really helped. So, because I do feel like when you have these things fighting each other, and it is kind of like a lot going on, and it's the projection was dim and dark, and I'm like, oh man, this is not the best way to watch this. But they go to this place that I don't want to talk about too much, that I was quite surprised by. I think there's influences from Pokemon there. There's just like some never-ending story stuff.
The Last Airbender as well.
Last Airbender,
like
obviously,
yeah.
I said never-ending story because there's just a few moments where it just reminded me of that. But yeah, I do think it kind of fumbles in that last act, because like those sequences in Macau and San Francisco are so kinetic and so fluid and so energetic and so fun to watch, where those are the moments that I felt giddy. And then even the moments that are a little bit more inspired by kung fu cinema and like the kind of flowy, dancey style, fantastical action sequences. There are a couple of those.
That's wuxia, by the way. So
wuxia, thank you. I'm not familiar. So
yeah. So like the obvious example would be Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger,
yes,
Hidden Dragon.
Yeah.
But it's been around, since.
That's the one most American audiences would be familiar with, right?
Yes, yeah. And again, it's almost like you're watching a dance in terms of fighting. Like another movie with Tony Leung is Hero, the Jet Li movie that came out in 2003, that actually I think there is a reference to that, where you see in one scene in the prologue where these arrows are coming at Tony Leung, and in Hero you see these arrows coming at Jet Li, and again, we should, another quick thing we should give a shout out to is stunt choreographer and stuntman Brad Allen worked on this film, and it's one of his last movies and passed away. And having worked with Jackie Chan, which again, a lot of people have been comparing certain clips to that have been released online, and there is an element also like of the comedic sort of stylings there, where you have that kind of fish out of water comedy at times, and I think, I mean, Jackie Chan is like the best of the best, and like Rumble in the Bronx is one of the most fun 90s movies, and this film isn't afraid to have that fun. I just wish that I just wish the comedy wasn't as forced in this film. Like it just feels like that, like and I know the MCU has kind of prided itself on having fun and being very comedic in ways that are unexpected or self-aware and self-referential.
There's one really good one that I did laugh at, and
there's moments. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't.
There's an airplane gag that is really funny,
right? And again, like I feel I have to give credit to the screenwriters for trying to do something a little bit different with the origin story.
Yeah, I thought
but
the
it
same
also
thing
does
watching
feel
it, yeah.
stretched out, where there are times where it's like I think I know what you're referencing moment wise, where I think if it had stopped there,
Yeah, I
it
agree.
would have been perfect. It would,
Yeah.
but I understand as well, you know, Shang-Chi isn't a classic superhero character that's been rebooted over and over and again,
So you
where
still
like,
need to introduce it to most audiences. But
yeah, so they
and
don't know
I'll
his
agree with you
story.
that after, I mean, they struggled with the origin story for a while, and we've gotten to a place where, okay, let's figure out a different way to do it. And like, oh, we'll tell it in a non-linear fashion where we'll kind of drop you in, drop you out, give you little tidbits here and reveal little pieces of his backstory and you know, his mother's history and things like that.
Or cut out
throughout the
Uncle Ben
movie.
completely in Spider-Man Homecoming, and
Yeah.
then make Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man
Uncle
kind
Ben.
of
Yeah, be
the
Uncle Ben,
substitute
yeah.
Uncle Ben, which I think
Yeah.
also works. But here, like, again, I applaud them for trying to do something different. It just feels like ultimately it's still there, but it works in terms of the sins of the father and the son not wanting that to define him as a person and wanting to be his own man.
Yep.
And sort of redeem his self and find inner peace in doing so. And I think those things are really emotionally strong, especially when thinking about, like, if you don't have maybe the greatest relationship with, you know, your father, and you maybe keep them at a distance. There was a moment in this movie that hit me on an emotional level that I was kind of surprised with, in terms of like how a child sees their father versus how, you know, when you grow up kind of maybe resenting them, and you see their
And you'll
follies. But
do anything that they say, kind of, and you just look up to them no matter what as a
well,
kid.
no, well,
Or
that's the
like,
thing. No, you reject them after a while.
well,
And
after a
then,
while, I mean, as a kid, you would do
yeah,
anything for your dad.
yeah.
Yeah.
As a kid, and you idolize them. You want
Yes,
to
no matter
be
what.
them.
No matter what,
You know,
essentially.
yeah. And then when you get older, you sometimes resent them, or you see so much of yourself in them that you don't like what's looking back at you. And I feel that that's
The movie
captured
does a good, yeah.
in an amazing
Yeah.
and very that stuff is very subtle, but I think is important. um and again, you know, Winwoo is a character that's not just a typical mustache twirling villain, and I think
Yeah.
casting Leung is
Which
like
the
is an incredible
classically what
piece
the
of casting.
Mandarin character kind of is, you know, I like you mentioned the scene that he has where he talks about that name that, you know, the Americans gave him, and like he has
Which is
this
an orange, which
fantastic,
is
yeah, like, and it's such a fantastic speech, and that's what I think the MCU is so great at, is like, you know, we talk about this just being a very good self-contained action adventure movie with great fight sequences, and like it stumbles in the last act, but overall is like a great father-son story, family story kind of thing. But then on top of that, if you're a big MCU fan, I feel like there's so much in here that either builds on the past, and what the MCU is so good at is taking things that either people didn't love how they were executed, or retconning things in ways that don't feel like total retcons, but feel like you're either building on the things of the past or just changing them slightly to kind of, you know, grow with the times and things like that too. And they
which
already
it does
tried.
reclaim that title of the Mandarin, because when the
Yeah.
Mandarin was created, you know, the racist connotation that came with it was acceptable.
I mean,
and
the
it
character's
was
name was originally Fu Manchu, wasn't it? And
yeah,
like, or that's what Shang-Chi's father was
was based on anyways
in
the
comics,
caricature
like,
of Fu
and
Manchu specifically, which is like a
yeah.
classic
So they
sort of caricature in pop culture
so how
history
they
that's no longer
rework that
acceptable.
into this, and then build on that original Iron Man movie where I said like everything comes full circle. The ring is a perfect metaphor of launching into this new phase of the MCU after Endgame. This really feels like, you know, the first movie, even Far From Home and Black Widow. Like, this feels like the first one that's like, here's something brand new. Here's building on the past. Here's moving forward to the future. We're going to have some of the faces that you're familiar with, some new faces we're going to introduce, and we're going to take these things, and even movies you didn't like Iron Man 3 that Eric and I love. But
Number one movie.
you're going to take that, which
in the
really
MCU.
tried to define what the Mandarin was going to be in the MCU, and then pulled a fast one on everyone. And I know that didn't really work for people, but like, this movie builds on that with that speech and with other things. Like it talks about the past and then moves it into the future. And I think this movie just does such a great job at that, at like teasing things with, whether it's the history of the rings or other moments in the movie. Like, it does a really good job of being self-contained, but then organically setting up, whether they're Easter eggs or big moments that set up the future. Because I think a huge part of these movies is that they all are interconnected, and like that'll either frustrate you or annoy you about all of these movies, or you'll be totally, like me, into it because of that. And like the more you watch them and rewatch them, and I just feel like it's made me go back and rewatch other movies, like after WandaVision, going back and watching, Age of Ultron and liking it more because of WandaVision. Like, I really hope people watch, this movie and see this iteration of Wenwu, and see what they do with the Mandarin character in Ten Rings in this, and then go back and, watch that first Iron Man movie or watch Iron Man 3. And weirdly, like, this movie doesn't have direct connections per se to either of those movies. But it builds on it. And I think that's so cool, as the MCU, of where we started 10 plus years ago with that first Iron Man movie. And that first group you see is the 10 Rings. And we're finally now, getting the history of that. And it is retcon, but like, and retcon can be annoying, but like when you have this big interconnected universe, there is a fun way to do it and a proper way to do it. And I think this movie kind of nails that. And like that, yes, we keep mentioning it stumbles in that last act, but for me personally, it never got to a point where it like soured my experience. Like, there were times where I'm like, man, I really enjoyed those fight sequences earlier, and this feels just kind of something I've seen before, and that it's still kind of cool because I was not expecting what I got in that last act in this movie. But it ends up just becoming the CG mishmash. But then the real villain of the movie being so great, of Tony Leung as Wenwu, is just so good that you forget these other things that are happening, and the action sequences are so good, and Simu Liu is so good. And then I'm like, man, this is one of the better origin movies in the MCU, and I think it's a upper tier MCU movie, and I think it's kind of going to go under the radar for a lot of people. Like, I think Shang-Chi's, again, not a character people are super familiar with. That, like, I don't know if people are like, oh, this is the one I'm super pumped for the MCU. I think we're all eagerly wanting to go back and see these movies in cinemas and get a new character and a fresh story, but I think people are going to be really, really pleasantly surprised with this. And I will end off on an, Eric, I'll let you do your final thoughts, but the two post-credit sequences I think are really, really, really cool without spoiling anything. Like, if you are, the post-credit scenes are those things for, the hardcore fans of, the MCU, because I feel
and also makes sense of what we've been talking about as well, in terms of like a certain thing.
Yeah, totally.
And we'll just leave it at that.
That's all we will leave it. But I also think you will be surprised at where I wasn't surprised with the Black Widow post-credit sequence, or I was a little underwhelmed because of, spoilers for Black Widow. We were introduced to a character, in a different thing first, when it was kind of out of order. So that was like, okay, I'm interested, but this doesn't seem like it has big implications, where it really seems like they're making this character a big thing moving forward. And that's awesome, because they absolutely crushed, I think, his first introduction. And like, yeah, I'll go back to that last act, and it stops the movie from being like, a fantastic movie for me, because I kind of tune out in the CG monster mash. But ultimately, I really, really dug it, and I was super pleasantly surprised as someone who, was still looking forward to it, being a huge fan of the MCU. But you never know, because like, even someone like I love with Paul Rudd and Ant-Man, or even Doctor Strange with Benedict Cumberbatch, like, I like this movie more than those. I felt like those were okay introductions to both of those characters, but neither, like the Ant-Man movies especially, like both of them don't do anything for me. Also in San Francisco, there's got to connect with those two characters at some point, you'd think. But this, I think, just like, it has some of the best action in the MCU, has some great world building that doesn't seem forced, a great score, a great lead performance, a great villain. And that's like, you go to these movies for that kind of stuff. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, as an origin story, I mean, mentioning Ant-Man and Doctor Strange, there's still room for them. I mean, more. It almost feels like it's the 11th hour now for Ant-Man specifically, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, where it's like, Quantumania is either going to be
The
like
third
the
movie
do
though
or
always
die,
usually like the third movie's always the one
is the
man, for
wackiest
me.
one.
Yeah.
But I also do feel that like maybe Peyton Reed is a journeyman director and
Yeah.
serviceable and gets the job done and has done some good work, on The Mandalorian recently. But I feel also like part of it is the director that
Yeah.
you're
And we've
choosing
talked
to behind
if
the scenes.
if you've I'll let you continue, but if you've listened to us for a while, I mean, Eric and I constantly, like, I know we're director guys anyway, like we go towards people's filmographies and not necessarily auteurs and auteur theory
Or that we
and things
believe like
that.
every film that this person
Yeah.
does is better. It's just a curiosity, like
Yeah.
as much as like who knows if the Edgar Wright version of Ant-Man
would have been
any better. I mean, maybe if
It
we
would've.
were in a multiverse. Well, there are still fingerprints of
Oh,
the
totally,
Edgar
yeah.
Wright and Joe Cornish script there. It's just that it's a very safe superhero movie compared to, as you mentioned, like, when you get to Iron Man 3, when you get to Thor Ragnarok, they take more chances there, or let the filmmakers get a little bit more wild, or add their signature to those films. And with Shang-Chi, like, it to me feels like that this as an origin story, 2/3 of it is so well done. And if it wasn't for that third act, I think it would be in my top 5.
Yeah, I think so
But I
too.
do think it is a great origin story because, again, comparing it to Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, it doesn't feel like, I'm sure they can make improvements on a Shang-Chi 2, which they probably will, and part 3 down the line. But it feels like this is a full experience overall and a more fulfilling one overall compared to those the first few phases of introducing new characters, maybe with the exception of the first Guardians movie, which really kind of nailed the weird tone. But again, that's because they got James Gunn, who has a genre background and kind of was doing his own thing, and that was so far removed from the MCU, with the exception of Thanos himself appearing. But this kind of feels like, okay, let's tell this character's story in a way that is paying tribute to classic Asian cinema, but also is westernized enough to be accessible and is still fun, but find ways to use
Blend
the
both of those two.
the
Yeah.
introduction to a character in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think that all works. I think I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. One of the other things that kind of soured me, not necessarily on the film, it's just one of the music choices, Hotel
right.
California by the Eagles, which,
Yeah.
like the dude in The Big Lebowski, I hate the Eagles. It's one of those boomer groups that I just never really got into.
In the movie, it's used ironically a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it does come back again, but it's not used in the actual film itself.
Right. It's not a diegetic kind or used in the score kind of thing. It's just it's used as a story beat or a comedic beat, and
where if it were in Guardians of the Galaxy or referenced in Guardians, it would have played, or in Deadpool.
If they ever cross
like
over, you never know. Shang-Chi might get that song in a Guardians crossover.
Right. But we also heard that song.
Weirdly, we on our way home, Eric and I get into the car, and the first song that plays on the radio as we're driving away from the train station is Hotel California, and it's the weirdest. Like I get it.
97.3.
It's a huge song, but it's just weird that we just saw that movie, just got back, and the first song on the radio as we go. It's just a weird thing that happens. I also, one more thing, shout out to the movie for, a good chunk of it not being in English either.
Yeah.
Cause I feel like, is it in Cantonese? Is that, I want to get the proper, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know exactly. Cause I know there's a different dialects of, of Chinese that and I want to make sure I get that right. So I'm sorry. But a good chunk of the movie is not in English, which I think is fantastic. Like, it starts off and the first, what seems like 10 minutes are subtitled, and which I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Cause I feel like they could have easily Americanized that. Like we're saying, of stripping all of that out and just having everyone speak English, even though they shouldn't be speaking English at times they should be speaking their like native language.
Or you
And
do
I
the
feel
Hunt for
like,
the Red October thing where you go into the mouth of the
no,
character and
that's
come back
yeah.
out, and like the
That can be
translation.
fun. That can be fun in a goofy, pulpy movie, but not in something like, and again, comic book movies are that sometimes, but I just appreciate like in an MCU movie too. It's like, no motherfuckers, you got to read subtitles for a while. Like you just
Yeah.
like we're going to be authentic to that. And sure, there are characters that go, oh, I speak English, so they'll start speaking in English, and that's fine. And
Or
like,
you have Awkwafina's character
who
who
just,
understands,
yeah,
but
which is
doesn't
great
speak it as well.
because
And I
that's
think that
such
that's
a
interesting
normal
as
thing.
well.
Like having friends, I remember growing up with my friend Mike, who his family's Polish, and even Nevis, who is Croatian. Like she speaks Croatian, but her Croatian is like, it's not her native language, and or she came here at a very young age, much like Awkwafina's character in the movie, right? Where you can understand it and you can sort of speak it, but you almost don't speak it because you know you can't speak it properly, so you kind of respond in English, and then sometimes your elders will understand English but they can't speak English very well, so it's like this weird mishmash of someone speaking in English and the other person speaking in their native language, but they're both talking to each other and can understand one another, but they can't speak the language. That was a lot, but like that's something that I thought was really interesting that they do here, and that I feel like is such a natural thing that, you know, a lot of families that have immigrated to, you know, the United States or to Canada or wherever, an English
English-speaking
country,
countries, yeah.
yeah, that that's so normal. So yeah, shout out to that as well. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4, but I was so close to giving it a 4.5. I just think that I agree with you, Eric, that it does fumble a bit with that last act. I think Awkwafina's character is written a little weirdly, even though I love her. But everything else I think kind of nails it. And I feel like, you know, upon rewatch, I could possibly bump this up even higher. And like, we'll post our MCU rankings over on our Letterbox page, so go subscribe over there, which is Untitled Podcast over on Letterboxd. So we'll post. Eric's already got a couple comments that his list is very interesting. And then,
And I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I
not,
love Iron Man 3.
Yeah.
It's for people that have not listened to the show or haven't watched before. Iron Man 3 is
your
still
number
my
one,
favorite MCU movie because it was
Which-
the first film in the MCU that I saw the filmmaker's voice truly coming through. Like that was a Shane Black movie through and through.
I mean,
Like that could have just been Lethal Weapon Iron Man edition.
Yeah, and we're celebrating 10 years of friendship this year, I think, as well as, you know, 4 years doing this show. We've been podcasting forever. But I love that, like, and me being an MCU fan that kind of faded during Age of Ultron, but they came back around, I think, around at the same time as you. And I know you were kind of mixed to indifferent on, you know, the MCU for a long time. And I think Iron Man 3 was that movie where, I mean, you still, you know, go in and they're hit or miss, but I have seen you can see where they kind of turned a corner, and they did give filmmakers more control and they started taking more risks. And like, that's when I started to get really into the MCU again, is because like when we kept getting, ironically, we have more MCU than we've ever had before. We have like 100 projects this year, but like when Age of Ultron came out, I was like, all right, I think we're getting the same thing over and over again. Like, I just don't really care about this. And then I think I'm with you with Iron Man 3, where I think me and you, a lot of people didn't like that movie because, you know, Tony Stark's not Iron Man for a big chunk of it, and
which I love. That's the thing I love about that movie.
And the Mandarin reveal people really didn't like, right? Those two things make, you know, but that Air Force One sequence in Iron Man 3 is one of the best action sequences in the MCU. And I just think that movie in general is absolutely, like, it's just a fun political thriller, that movie. And like, that is where it turned a corner for me, where they started hiring more interesting directors. They started giving them, I mean, they always hired interesting people, but they, you know, Kevin Feige was like, okay, I'm here to steer the ship. I'll kind of let you do what you want. I'll still tell you, you still have to do things here and there to connect things, but like, we'll let you put your stamp on things. And I feel like we've continued to get that, at least in these singular movies. Like, you know, the team up movies, you know, the Russos controlled those for a while and they felt like Russo team up movies, but like the individual movies feel like, you know, they're bringing in interesting people. And that's why I'm so excited for Chloe Zhao's Eternals, and like, you know, the other people that they've brought in, that you know, Taika Waititi coming back, and like, just, you know, these individual voices that can kind of, you know, put their spin on the MCU and do different genres and do different things, or get inspired by international cinema, or get inspired by slapsticks, goofy comedy, or get, like, we're talking about What If right now, where we're getting a murder mystery this Wednesday. We've reviewed the first 3 episodes of What If. If you want to go check that out on this channel, you guys can check that out as well. So it's a really exciting thing, and I turned a corner at the same time. And yeah, not every movie is fantastic.
And on top of that, I just want to say with Iron
Yeah.
Man 3, the other thing that I really loved about it is that even though it's still very cartoony and kind of, again,
still
almost
a comic
like
book movie,
a comic book movie, but almost like a weird sort of buddy cop comedy thing as well. But the thing I also kind of liked is that it introduced post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And that we saw Tony going through the events of, everything that basically accumulated through both the Avengers movies and him dealing with the idea of being human, because obviously the thing that they never really tackled completely in Tony Stark's storyline that's prevalent in the comic
alcoholism
books, is the demon in the bottle storyline. So this almost that kind of almost replaced it a little bit, where I think that's also what kind of made that movie or sold me, where I saw Tony Stark as, I mean, he's still cartoony, he's still a two-dimensional character,
but they give there's weight to the things that happen in these movies, and someone who discovers that aliens are real and they save the universe and like all this shit, like, you're gonna be fucked up from that. And it was cool to actually see that in a movie, and then that's wrapped around a Shane Black movie essentially, and in the MCU. So they turned a corner and they've continued to crush it. And like I can't wait to see Eternals now. And did the Spider-Man trailer come out? I don't know, we're recording this, so I'm excited for the rest of the year. And then the Disney Plus stuff feels totally different, and that's the one thing I didn't touch on too much, but like, I do feel like there's a distinct vibe to the Disney Plus shows, even though they all feel completely different, and a distinct vibe to big screen MCU movies. Like, this felt like no, this is a $200 million movie compared to you get $20 million an episode on the Disney Plus shows, and they just have obviously different pacing, being television and movies. But like I do,
but they
think
do connect well and complement each other.
I totally agree with that. I just feel like when it comes to the action sequences and the pacing and like just the feel of it, like, this felt big screen. And I'm not diminishing, like, Loki and WandaVision are in my top 10 MCU projects, and they're really close to Shang-Chi when it comes to ranking stuff. But I just feel like this just had that big screen vibe that I don't even think Black Widow had.
Do you also think that maybe coming back to
maybe that
the theater and not having seen an MCU film in the theater since Spider-Man Far From Home,
2 years almost, like,
maybe sort of added to that experience of watching it?
And we even saw it at a shitty theater too. like that's the thing.
Scotiabank Theater in Toronto, the IMAX theater is a great theater, but
the AVX theater is pretty decent, but we saw it in one of the normal theaters, so there was no masking. It was super dim, like, right away, Eric. And I was like, I had the same problem in Captain Marvel. I'm like, is it the lighting in the movie or is the projection bad? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure just the projection is bad. And then there's a dead pixel in the corner right in front of your line of sight, like right where you were sitting. And I was just
and it was really noticeable. And the older you get, the more, fidgety and fastidious you become. And like, those things never used to bother me as much, because I was just like, I'll just let it go. I'm happy to be sitting in a movie theater and enjoying it. But today, for some reason, every time, like, when there was a brighter looking scene, I would just look at that side of the corner and be like, man, this is such, like, again, it doesn't affect my opinion of the film, but it does make you wish that, Disney would look into that kind of stuff, or like any studio that is screening a film at the Scotiabank Theater, or any theater for that matter. They do screen tests before critics come in, and this is inside baseball, but I think picture and presentation in general is just
super important.
So important.
It did hinder my experience a little bit during this,
and it reminded me a little bit of the experience we had with Spectre, and the Bond film, but like,
that was, we've talked about that before. But anyways, like, it doesn't, obviously I still really enjoyed the movie, but That added on to, I want to see this again, either in IMAX or in a really solid, properly masked, bright theater with great sound. But I can't wait to watch it again. I can't wait to talk about it more in spoilery detail, because I feel like there is a lot of stuff to talk about that we had to kind of dance around in this. But that being said,
how much do you think Sonic would like this film?
Yeah, there's some good Sonic references. Notice the rings, obviously, and there's a moment underwater that I noticed that I felt like was a Sonic reference, and there's a music cue that I want to throw into that scene when it eventually is available. That
somebody's going to.
I know, and I will. I'll do it first because I want to. But thank you all for listening. 4 out of 5 for me, a 3.5 out of 5 for Eric. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you.
And you've stuck to 60 minutes.
I mean, it's an hour. It's a Marvel movie, baby. We do this multiple times weekly. We review all kind of the biggest and new releases, both theatrically and on streaming, now in video and podcast form. So it's Untitled Movie Reviews on your favorite podcast service, or you can get it right here on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Go follow us on Letterboxd, like I mentioned, Untitled Podcast. We're Untitled_cast on all those social medias. Other social medias. Please subscribe to our other shows, which are the Untitled Movie Podcast and Untitled Movie Conversations. Those are also available on all other podcast services. Our 100th episode just went out, which is why we're celebrating with a brand new YouTube channel and things like that. Please show it to your friends. If people like movies, please, we're begging you. No, we have spent so much time on this. No.
Out of all the people on YouTube that you could go
listen
and
to
listen
us
and watch, yeah, maybe if in between other people as well. Yeah. I'm hoping at one day we'll also be in POG form.
Yeah. But thank you. As always, my name is Matt Rorabeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com, and you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rorabeck.
And I'm Eric Marchen. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
In the words of the dude, fuck the Eagles.